Today Africa Podcast is a podcast series where we interview African entrepreneurs and professionals and share the stories behind their businesses. In each interview, we ask how they got started, how they grew, and how they run their business today. The stories are inspiring and also provide specific advice and insight into starting a business. By sharing these stories, we want to help others get started.
Welcome to another episode of Today Africa Podcast. And today we'll be speaking with an amazing founder, Prince Jacobs, a founder and CEO of Zazu, a fintech startup that is providing banking experience to entrepreneurs and businesses shaping the continent. Prince, you are welcome.
Thank you very much for having me today. Looking forward to the chat.
Today I have a lot of things to ask you. It will be a conversation. So I hope you are ready for that.
Of course, always happy to have a quick conversation.
All right. Okay, let's start from the very beginning. Can you tell me what you have spent the last 8 years of your life doing?
Yes, last 8 years of my life when I was still young. So I've been in the European fintech scene for a decade, mostly out of Germany, and I was lucky enough to join a company called Solaris Bank in the very early days. So what we were doing is making sure that fintechs, but also various other companies, had access to white label financial services, right? So banking as a service in the European market. And it was my job to set up the commercial organization and to really drive that from, 20 people all the way up to 800 plus, and thereby also becoming unicorn in that journey. And that was really dealing with questions like how, as a fintech, can you get up and running in the European space, right? And we, as Solaris, were providing the backbone with the regulatory as well as on the technology side, a lot of the heavy lifting. And over time, we saw that it wasn't so much only the fintechs that were interested in this, but we actually saw that there was a lot of big companies that said, I want to actually expand my ecosystem in offering financial services. Look at Samsung, look at various mobility providers who all said the cards and the likes are very interesting for me. So that's what I've been doing. And that's also where, of course, I saw a lot of the fintechs models that worked well and that didn't work well. And together with our colleagues at Zazu, we then said, look, why not take that knowledge that we have gathered over those last years and actually apply that into a market where we see a lot of opportunities happening in the fintech space. And that's how Zazu basically was born.
Okay, let's talk about the knowledge that you have gathered over the years from your previous experience. So what are those knowledge that you have gathered that is helping you build Zazu?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, what has helped a lot is as a young company or as a founder, you have a lot of roller coaster days, right? So you have days that are very high, you have days that are very low. But especially on the low days, it's important to remember that the good days are coming as well, right? So as long as you have a bad day, you know a good day is coming. So that always keeps you up and running. I think that's very important. Plus, when it comes to hiring, for example, or building out your team, I think the overarching question that we have been always asking ourselves is to say, would I want to have more, right? Would I want to have 10 more profiles or 10 more persons just like that person before you hire them? And that kind of gives you an indication like, hey, is this the kind of cultural fit that we're looking for in the company? And definitely make sure that you get people around you that are not just saying yes all the time, but are actually challenging the interaction or actually challenging what you have to say. But these are very important aspects. And I would also say time blocking, right? Make sure that you don't just get managed by your calendar, but actually manage your own calendar. So the other way around, so that you have enough time to reflect, enough time to actually do the work that you want to do during the day, and not only get stuck in meetings. Because we all know those days where you're back to back in Zoom meetings, and it's just a complete destructive for your creativity.
You said something that caught my attention, which is don't allow your calendar to manage you, but be the one to manage your calendar. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, Right? It's easy to just say, okay, I'm shooting in another meeting, or we quickly chat for 10 minutes, which quickly turn into 30 minutes. So make sure that you have enough respect for your own time and for your colleagues' time, right? To make sure if it's really only 10 minutes, stick to the 10-minute mark. Make sure you schedule your day or your week out in advance to understand, okay, where do I want to do what kind of work? And actually be disciplined enough to then also say, well, if I'm hitting that time block to actually start cracking on my emails, I'm actually going to do my emails instead of doing something else or having another quick chat with a colleague because I might as well catch up with that colleague, right? So really be disciplined with your time and be aware that you, to some degree, should have a life outside of your calendar as well, and actually want to do some creative thinking or hobbies or sports that are, I think, very important for becoming successful.
So that there are two co-founders, yourself and Dami. So my question is, how did the people meet, and what convinced you that he's the right guy? He's the right guy to be your co-founder.
So we looked at, first of all, we knew each other already from the Solaris time, from the European fintech space. So we actually, back in the day when he was not yet working at Solaris, we were sometimes battling for the same deals in the market, right? So we knew each other as competitive forces in the very beginning, and then at some point I was able to bring him onto Solaris Bank, where we worked together for a long time in the commercial organization, where he really built out all the strategic partners and channel partners for Solaris. And there I saw the expertise that he brings in around networking, around go-to-market strategies building, and really building out the network, if you will, right? And that was for us very important to get right. Plus the mindset that he shares together with me is just no plan B. We just go full force in, and there's no way back. Right, and that keeps you motivated for each other. There's always something to say for, but an ideal founder team should not be two commercial people, right? And I understand that because you, to some degree, want to split responsibilities. But I have taken on much more the role of, right, as the CEO, less commercial, but more looking at finances, operations, legal, team building, and to some degree, product. So that's where we clearly separate the responsibilities for ourselves. And of course, we have a couple other very, very talented people around us as well that make sure that pick up all the other gaps that we have among the two of us, like technology, like to some degree project management or local regulatory knowledge. So these are things that we have, of course, covered for by hiring and working with the right people locally.
Let's talk about Zazu. Both of you came together to found Zazu. You were working in Europe, that is Germany, like you say. Why come to Africa? Why choose Africa, and why choose South Africa to be your base?
Yeah, of course, right? There's a lot of people that say, why would you give up a good paying job to do something completely crazy in a continent that you're not as familiar in? I get that point, but it is purely looking at and coming from the drive of wanting to have impact, wanting to build cool products. And the European fintech scene is quite consolidated, right? It's quite mature. So the new fintechs that are coming in are just an iterative improvement of what has been out there. Whereas what you see in Africa, there's a ton of opportunities out there still, where a lot of the business models that you see in Europe or the US or in Asia can be applied with the right local twists to the market. And when we sat together and said, look, where can we have the most impact? For us, it was very clear by looking at the data, by looking at the entrepreneurs, that SME banking is simply broken in Africa, right? So obviously everybody knows the backbone of the African economy are the small SMEs, but yet all of the big banks that are out there in Africa don't really care for the SMEs, for the freelancers, for the sole proprietors. So there is a big gap in what support they are getting, those local founders, versus what they're getting in the European or the US space. And that is exactly why we said, well, let's look more detailed into Africa. And then also we applied a decision framework on the different jurisdictions, where obviously with fintech, you are looking at regulatory spaces. So the regulator is a very important aspect. And what we found in South Africa is that it's a very robust regulator, but yet very friendly and willing to look and push innovation into the market. So that sets us up for success. Then the second aspect that for us was very important was the number of SMEs that are being created in the country every year. And in South Africa, there is more than 400,000 SMEs created every year, right? And that's, if you were to combine Germany, France, and Nigeria together, that's roughly the same amount of SMEs created in one country. So that shows that there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the country. And thirdly, because we're talking about a digital product, right, the digital neobank, it is for us important to go and pilot in a market where the population, or at least the SME population, is much more service oriented and a bit more tech savvy and ready to take on these digital products and to test them out. So that is why we went ahead with South Africa as a hypothesis. And then we said to each other, you know what? First, before we do anything else, we're just going to stay in South Africa for a while, talk with hundreds of different people, from literally knocking on the doors of different mom and pop stores to entrepreneurs, co-working spaces, and just ask a bunch of different questions around what their situation looks like with banking, what they're missing, what they're seeing. And a lot of the answers that came back was like, look, my bank, it kind of works, right? If I send money, I know it's going to arrive. And if I go to the branch, at some point I will speak to somebody. But they're lacking the real next level of banking, which is making everything work, first of all, stably and smoothly, and in a way that it's almost fun to interact with it, that you can actually get useful insights out of this. So with that first information, we went back and started to sketch out first ideas on what that should look like, what shape should that take place. And very quickly for us, we said, well, it's obvious that wherever you start as a business, you would always start with a business bank account. That's where effectively, right, you need your money in, you need your money out with a card or some kind of payment options. And that has then grown out now to a slightly larger platform ecosystem where you as an entrepreneur can really manage your financial flows and actually get an insight on your financial health of your business. So that's where the drive really came from.
Why the name Zazu? Why not one fancy name, or one kind of a fancy name? Why the name Zazu?
We looked at a couple of different options, of course, but for us, it had to be a name that's very catchy, right? So that was a very important part. Of course, also Zazu means movement, and money needs to flow to thrive and to make sure that you understand what's happening. But it's of course also with a wink towards, as everybody would know, the bird in Lion King, right? The only reasonable character, if you will, that people should listen to, and that's where the personal advice aspect comes into as well, right? So Zazu being the bird, the advisor, if you will, to the king, if you will, right? So in the movie, so that's where it really comes from. And when we started to test things, we really saw it's really catchy, and the more we started using it, we were actually very happy with the name, and it stuck. So then we just doubled down.
Do you know any Nigerian musician called Portable? How is it the name Zazu?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
All right, just try and look up to you. You find out. Okay. Yes, you put South Africa and South Africa. Was there anything like an experience or an encounter that you had that made you, or that prompted you guys, okay, and said, let's go to Africa, let's go to South Africa? Was there any experience or any encounter you had in your previous workplace that prompted you guys choosing South Africa?
So from a personal perspective, not at all. So in all honesty, I had not been in South Africa before. So literally the first time I came there was to purely look for the business opportunity. And that goes to show that, right, if you just look at Africa from, let's say, the large media, you always think, oh, there's a lot of things happening there, there's a lot of promise, but we haven't yet seen that really happen. But when you're actually in the country itself, you see a lot of really, really cool startups, really excited people that are super driven to get something going. And that really changed my mind on, actually, it is not the way it's being portrayed in the big media. It is much further advanced than you actually would think. And that really excited us for the market itself. Plus, by now, the community that we have gathered around ourselves, for example, around Innovation City, a co-working space that we where we're located in Cape Town. There's a ton of really, really cool entrepreneurs that are supporting us, that are sharing introductions, sharing insights, doing testing with us. So it's been an amazingly welcoming to be there in the market. But from a personal trigger, there was none. It was purely looking at the opportunity and the willingness, the drive to create impact somewhere that we had seen in Europe before, but were missing in our daily lives in Europe. So that's where really the drive came from.
There you have spent some time in South Africa. You now have an experience living in South Africa, not just living in South Africa, but living in South Africa as a founder, as an entrepreneur. What experience have you gathered within the short while that you have stayed in South Africa?
So for us, but of course, also again, Cape Town being slightly different than various other cities in South Africa, right? We totally understand that. But what I have found is very, very warm people that want to see you succeed. They are still, to some degree, wondering, what do I do with my big bank versus what do I do with the new after they're coming out, and how much can I trust all of this? So there's a bit of an educational process that probably still needs to happen. But as mentioned, there is a ton of talent that we're seeing. We're making really a lot of use of a lot of local insights and a lot of local support that we are getting, and people being very excited generally to see companies succeed, right? So we've been very, very happy with how we've been received, as I had mentioned. Right, being now in Cape Town, obviously very different environment than what you see in Europe. Very different flow of the city and of the country, but a lot of promise. And what we saw with the change of the government, right, after the elections, we saw a total shift in people's mindset, if you will, almost to really be more optimistic and ready to take on new challenges. And that really also propelled us to really go that extra level to see there is a real potential to succeed in the market.
So let's come to your business, or to your startup, Zazu. So can you tell us more about Zazu and what Zazu is all about, the new thing you are bringing into the market?
Yeah. So when we were doing, of course, our research, right, we of course looked at the different banks and how are they dealing with customer support, with their products, with the onboarding experience of creating an account. And I must tell you, there's nothing that's very exciting, right? So that was quite a painful experience. So we said to ourselves, look, there are so many easy ways to do this so much better. And we kind of wondered to ourselves, why are these big banks not just improving the small details on their websites or on their onboarding processes? So what we are really bringing to market is a bank account at the core, right, with the account and the card and the payments. But around that, making sure that people can really understand, what does my financial health looks like for my business? What next step do I need to take to really make sure I can thrive as a business? Right, I've had many interactions with, whether it's taxi drivers, e-commerce store builders, to coffee shop owners, all who said, well, I would have loved to had a mentor in the past to really make sure I can understand what benefits can exist by running your own company, right? There's various tax benefits that you can optimize for. There is accounting principles that you have to look at. But a lot of these people are left to their own devices, right? So we are really offering a guiding hand to make sure we help you that digitally incorporate a company, giving you a proper bank account that is fully digital, so you can manage this on the go, because many people are busy with their daily lives, right? They don't have time to sit behind the laptop for 3 hours and figure out what the banking situation looks like. They want to get that on the go in their app, and from the get-go understand, hey, these are the next steps. Whether that means setting aside a certain amount of money for your taxes because your tax reports are due, whether that is paying certain invoices or managing certain expenses to understand, how can I optimize for my expenses, or how can I further increase my revenue? All of these things a bank should be able to answer, because they have all that raw data. But banks are not used to dealing and managing data in such a way that it's visualized and made friendly enough for customers to understand, right? Because most SME owners globally don't have a PhD in finance. They don't always understand the intricacies that exist that you need to deal with an accountant. So why not make that easier for them and give them the tools to actually interact with the data, understand that data, and give them those next steps And that is why we said to ourselves, next to that account and the card, we're really building out a platform around that where we connect with different players, right? Lenders, payroll providers, e-commerce checkout tools, just again to make sure that all of these critical financial flows that you as a business have come together. And then by, of course, the magic of AI that had to be dropped somewhere, we make sure that we give you contextualized and personalized advice on what to do next. And that is where things become much easier than for the business. So that is really what we're bringing to market, and something that we haven't seen in the space before.
You mentioned about data, which is very critical. And yes, I know Africa, we are not yet conscious about our data, like the way the Western world, where we are coming from, are so conscious about their data. So how secure is your platform so that someone's data doesn't get tampered?
Yeah, no, obviously, right. So this has been critical for us, and that's luckily again our CTO has quite a lot of experience in building out core banking systems and other applications in the financial industry. So what we look at is how do you make sure security is woven into the very fabric of the product, right? So not just as an additional layer on top, but really make sure that from all angles we're looking at how can you best secure the product. And sometimes that might mean the customer might need to take an extra step for verifying themselves or for releasing a transaction. But I think if you explain that well enough to a customer that this is to reduce fraud, to make sure the money remains safe, they're willing to take that extra step, to take that extra second to just ensure that safety. And this is where starting from scratch, you can obviously make use, right? Starting technically from scratch, you're able to make use of the latest technologies, whereas the older banks, the traditional banks, are using legacy technology that is 30, 40, 50 plus years old. And obviously there's a lot of loopholes, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that I have found in those tools. And that's why they have difficult times to maneuver a lot, because they're stuck with that old system, and that would take a lot of money to really move that over to other systems. So that's the advantage that we bring to the market. So it's the expertise, and it is the latest technology that is being used in a smart way.
Yes, you are building a business, a startup, an amazing fintech here in Africa. So what challenges have you faced in the short space that you have started your business?
I would say the difficulties that we have faced, well, the most obvious one being, of course, especially in the very beginning of our build phase and when we were getting ourselves known in the market, there were a lot of people that were very skeptical of us, right? Like, what do these European guys know about setting up a business in Africa? Who do they think they are? Right? Obviously, fair enough. They should be skeptical, right? But if you look at the data, over 50% of the fintech unicorns are foreign founders, right? Are people that look at the market with a completely fresh set of eyes. They are not limited by having been exposed to the systems for very long, so they can see the gaps and they can see those difficulties much more easily than a typical local founder can. So that was a big point, right? How do we make sure we come across and we are positioned in a way that people actually believe in us and believe in the story? So that the only way you can do that is by just being out there and have a lot of conversations, talk with a lot of people, and show that grit, show that you're actually making progress towards the different goals that you're setting for yourself. And just being out there, right? Be vulnerable, be challenged, be asked hundreds of questions, go for different interviews and different coffees and events and everything else, just to make sure that people start to see, hey, these guys are for real. They're living here now, they're going for it, they're getting first funding. And there's actually a product that's being tested. So actually, these guys are building something, right? So that's where, again, discipline and tenacity come in to just show them and prove them wrong effectively. So that was the big one. But that still, of course, doesn't make up for the fact that we don't have local South African banking knowledge, right? And that's something that we're very honest to with ourselves as well. We know building businesses and we know building fintech businesses. But what we don't know is how do South African banking and the regulations operate here? And how do you deal with the regulator locally? Because every regulator is slightly different, of course. And that is where we very quickly took on a couple of advisors and a couple very, very experienced senior bankers to help us navigate these waters as well, which again brought in more trust from the banks and from the regulators' perspective that we know what we're doing because we're surrounding ourselves by knowledgeable and reputable people in the market. So that helped a lot. And by now, more and more people have actually started to believe in us. And that's also what caused the waiting list to grow, of course.
You made mention of bringing in local people to come in as advisors, which was one of the things I was about to ask, because building, like you said, you're an European and coming to Africa to build a business, and you don't surround yourself with the locals that knows the banking system of that place. Yes, people kind of be skeptical about you because they will say, no,
Of
we
course.
don't really know you. What do you know about us that you want to help us, solve? Which is a very smart move.
Quick addition to this, right? So even though we of course don't know perhaps all the intricacies or didn't know all the intricacies of the local banking scene, at the very front where the customer sits with the product and the apps, the entrepreneurial challenges that exist, right, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, they are largely the same. It is about how do you get your first customers, how do you optimize your finances, how do you hire the best teams. These are all the same difficulties that entrepreneurs are facing. And so it doesn't matter if you build out a neobank in Europe or in Asia or in Africa, because largely you will serve similar products for to solve the same problems that they're facing. It is just about how do you apply that locally and how do you set up operations in such a way that the local regulators are happy with that as well, of course. And that's indeed where the local expertise needs to come in.
Probably you heard this narrative that the problem that Africans we have is the ability to send in money or receive money from diaspora, which I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that is what were the things that you heard when you were in Europe, that when you came to Africa or South Africa, that you got to know that they were not actually true?
I would say a lot of it is to do with in Africa you don't have infrastructure. In Africa, half of the people are perhaps farmers. Obviously, this is not true, right? But this is obviously what a lot of people have in their mind when they talk about the continent is underdeveloped, and there's not enough people that are really pushing for real change. That's obviously something that cannot be true, right? Obviously, you see a lot of really cool companies out there in Africa, but what you unfortunately also see is that a lot of the investors don't yet fully believe in Africa. And that causes this spiraling cycle of there's not enough funding coming in, so entrepreneurs cannot take as much risk or take as much bold decisions. So they need to be a bit more closer to the ground, right? And by that, build healthier businesses because they need to go for profitability much quicker than what you would see in the US. But that also leads them to grow much less quickly and therefore also be much less, perhaps much less innovative than what you would see in the US. But what I have seen here is that you have a lot of people that are very well educated, that are very smart, and really their drive is very different, right? Their drive is not just saying, oh, I just want to create something fancy, something cool. No, they actually want to build something that can uplift the country, that can really grow them and their community into something greater than that they currently are. And that is not really something that you see as much in the European space, right? The European space is more, I do it for myself and for my own status, whereas I think in Africa, that's much more around how can I support the larger environment or community around me. Yeah, I think that would sum it up.
Speaking about investors, you mentioned about investors, or some investors not having faith about investing here in Africa. You are from there, and you're building your business or your startup here in Africa. So how are you able to raise funds? Since you are building a startup in Africa, I believe that if you are building it in Europe, it will be much easier for you to raise funds. So how are you able to raise funds that are using to build Zazu?
Yeah, no, I would subscribe to that. That probably raising funds in Europe for a European business would have been a slightly easier way to go about things. But we like to do sometimes things a bit more difficult. So that's where we're at. In the very beginning, right, when we had the idea and we wanted to start building, fully bootstrap, right? So fully using our own money because we were so convinced of what we're building and the need for this in the market. Then at some point we realized, well, we obviously don't have unlimited bank accounts ourselves either. So let's bring in some knowledgeable people. And that is where we were able to find a mix of angels and advisors that partially come from the European space, founders, board members, from companies that we have worked with or from our own network that believe in us, as well as African founders that understand the pains that those SMEs are having or that they have had themselves around banking, and they fully subscribe to the vision that we are having around building powerful banking for ambitious people. And that is why we were able to collect a very nice amount of angel funds, and with that building out the first proposition in the market. And what you often see is that in Africa people are a bit more cautious with investing, or at least international investors investing into Africa, they're a bit more cautious. And you just need to get over the first hurdle to show that first product market fit with your first 500 to 1,000 customers that are paying and actually starting to grow and use the business on use the product on a daily basis. And once you have that, then more and more people and also local investors, local VCs, family offices will show up and support the idea. So that is what we're building towards right now, right? Getting that product live in with as much stretching every penny that we can in a true entrepreneurial fashion. And still, of course, always raising fundraising on our side. But we believe that as soon as we go live and we have first customers on the platform, things will become much easier. Story about, do we believe in those guys and do we believe in the vision? But what are the numbers saying? And are the numbers actually backing up what the vision portrays to be?
So what are the key lessons that you have learned in your journey building your business here in Africa?
What I have learned from building the business here in Africa, I think it comes close to, of course, what we talked about a bit earlier around what I had learned in Solaris, but it's a bit different, of course, to be in a company like Solaris where there was some basic things set up already, versus really starting it yourself from scratch and being responsible for everything, right? And I think it's very important for a founder to understand that yes, you can do all kinds of small tasks yourself, right? Whether it is managing contracts or managing payroll or do some of the accounting or build the product roadmap. But all of these smaller tasks will at some point eat up and stack up, and before you know it, eat up all your time. So it is very important to make sure that very quickly on you delegate and find the right people around you that can set up their own processes and let them run their processes, give them that independence instead of you thinking that you need to own all of that, because you will become a bottleneck, right? And you will become that person that is actually slowing down the business because you want to perhaps take or keep too much control. So I think that's very important. Plus, a lot of people would expect the founder to hold all the answers, right? So they come to you for all kinds of questions. But in all honesty, I rarely have the answer. But I know where to find the answer or who to ask to get that answer. And I think that's the most important part in being a founder, is understand where can you go to and what support do you have around you to get the answers that you're looking for, and understand what resources to tap when. So those are things that that I really learned to really make use of much better. And indeed, just don't be afraid to ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to step into that uncomfortable conversation, perhaps with meeting somebody new and asking them for support or for insights. That's where you can see that people are really excited to support you and to make you a success.
You mentioned about delegation, your team members coming to you for asking you questions and expecting answers to be given to them. How were you able to build your team, and how did you put systems and processes in place that will help in smooth running of Zazu?
Yeah. So in 2024, right? So last year, things were obviously a bit more chaotic because we were just running around all kinds of places to do everything. But in the very beginning, or actually at the end of 24, we started to put in place very clear goals and very clear deadlines and very clear responsibilities along with those goals. So making it very easy to understand, okay, we have these sets of goals that we need to reach by the quarter or by mid-year or by the end of the year. Who's responsible for that goal? And do they have the tools and the resources they need to actually achieve that, right? That's first and foremost setting them up for success and letting them make their own decisions on that, how to best achieve that. But other than that, it is important to also have, at the very least, weekly interactions, if not every other day, to just understand what's happening, where can we support each other, what do we need to spar on together to actually make this happen. And we are using Monday.com for this, right? So a knowledge center, a knowledge tool, if you will, knowledge creation and retention tool that has been helping us a lot in making it all accessible very quickly and very easily. So that has been the backbone of us so far to really make sure data gets shared properly. But we are for now still with a very small team. So it's a bit easier to manage all of this because there's only that many people that you need to liaise with. But this is going to set us up for scaling that out as well, because these people will be able to grow up their own teams, set up their own sub goals with that. And as mentioned before, I think ownership and making them feel that they can have a true impact into the company and into their goals is what's making people very successful and very happy in their role.
What advice would you give to other non-Africans who would love to build their startup or their businesses here in Africa? What advice would you give to them?
I would say don't be afraid or shy by looking at the media or whatnot. Just go there, figure it out for yourself, and find that gap. Be convinced of something, and then just go full force. Just go. Doesn't matter what everybody is saying. Have 2, 3, 4 advices around you that you're listening to, and for the rest you ignore all the noise. That's not going to help you at all. Just focus hardcore on what you believe is the right thing to do. And very quickly you will find out that there's more and more people that are rooting for you to actually win, right? And visit as many places as you can. Talk with as many people as you can in the market, just to understand how do they tick, what are their exact problems, because nobody else is going to tell you better than the actual potential customers that you need to build for.
Today Africa Podcast is a podcast series where we interview African entrepreneurs and professionals and share the stories behind their businesses. In each interview, we ask how they got started, how they grew, and how they run their business today. The stories are inspiring and also provide specific advice and insight into starting a business. By sharing these stories, we want to help others get started.